Hello and welcome to the Dailies. American headlines were dominated by two parallel crises testing presidential power at home and abroad. In Minnesota, the fatal ICE shooting of Renée Good escalated into a national flashpoint, raising constitutional questions as President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act. At the same time, global attention focused on Iran, where Trump's apparent pause on military action sparked intense debate over diplomacy, deterrence, and pressure from allies. The Minnesota ICE saga was one of the dominant center-stage U.S. headline stories, especially across major national outlets. Most scrambled to cover developments like fresh and graphic new details about Renée Good's killing via police, fire, and 911 records, and also backlash as a second ICE-linked death surfaces and gains national attention. Also, many outlets discussed President Trump's threats to invoke the Insurrection Act, which instantly turns a local crisis into a constitutional national security story. A New York Times video analysis challenges the Trump administration's claim that Renée Good weaponized her SUV and ran over an ICE agent before she was shot dead in Minneapolis on January the 7th. By synchronizing agent cell phone footage with other videos as well, the Times reconstructs the incident millisecond by millisecond, focusing on the most disputed moments. The visual evidence indeed shows no sign the agent, Jonathan Ross, was run over, and also highlights how he moved into a dangerous position near the vehicle before shots were fired. And also, the piece shows that probably more footage may still emerge. The Washington Post explains what could follow if Trump invokes the Insurrection Act in Minnesota amid protests over the fatal ICE shooting of Renée Good. The piece highlights the law dating to the early 1800s allows the president to deploy active duty troops or federalized National Guard forces on U.S. soil to suppress rebellion or to enforce federal law, even without a governor's consent. However, it also notes that legal experts say such a move would be extraordinary and likely face court challenges from the governor, Tim Walz, and also Minnesota officials. The act sets few limits on troop numbers or duration, raising fears of escalation. Another story that appeared frequently across the front pages was Venezuelan opposition leader Machado gifting her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. The Wall Street Journal depicts Machado's White House visit as a high-profile gesture, but with limited political payoff. The report explains how Machado presented Trump with her Nobel Peace Prize, which he accepted, hoping to secure stronger U.S. backing for a democratic transition after Nicolas Maduro's capture. But the piece suggests Trump remains more interested in pragmatic deals with Venezuela's acting leader, Delcy Rodriguez, citing oil corporation and also prisoner release. It goes on to say that Machado left publicly praising Trump, yet without any clear commitments. Politico examines new polling on how do Americans stand on taking control of Greenland. The piece cites fresh CNN polling with stark findings. 3/4 of Americans oppose any U.S. move to take control of Greenland, with strong resistance, especially among Democrats, and an even split among Republicans. The piece indeed frames the issue as part of a broader backlash against Trump's aggressive foreign policy posture, with many respondents saying he has gone too far in expanding U.S. power overseas. By linking Greenland to anxieties over Venezuela and Iran as well, the piece suggests that voters fear escalation, prolonged deployments, and also hidden motives behind intervention. International coverage of Iran was dominated by reports that Trump may delay strikes, with Witkoff and other briefings pointing to diplomacy over military action. Israeli and U.S. outlets focused heavily on behind-the-scenes pressure, Gulf states urging restraint, and also Israel weighing retaliation risks, all the while keeping all options on the table as the defining headline. The Telegraph frames Trump's hesitation on Iran as less about compassion and more about competing pressure from America's own allies. The piece notes that while Netanyahu pushes for a decisive strike to finish off Iran's battered regime, Gulf leaders are urgently lobbying Trump to step back, fearing blowback on their territory, oil infrastructure and U.S. bases. The analysis suggests Trump is also buying time militarily, with key naval assets not yet in place. Israeli media also framed Iran through one main lens. Will Trump strike or delay? Coverage spotlighted reports of a pause, including claims that Netanyahu urged restraint, as we have said, while stressing Israel remains on high alert for retaliation and escalation. The Times of Israel reports that President Trump has privately signaled to Tehran he is not planning an imminent strike after a last-minute diplomatic push led by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman and Egypt. The piece cites Iran's ambassador to Pakistan, who claimed Trump urged restraint and said he doesn't want war, even as Washington keeps pressure on through new sanctions targeting Iranian security officials and also shadow banking networks. The piece also notes a visible de-escalation on the ground, with U.S. forces returning to Qatar's Al Udeid base after precautionary withdrawals. The Times of Israel also reported on a notable shift in Washington's tone on Iran, as U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff says the Trump administration hopes for a negotiated deal that tackles four core issues. The piece explains that Iran's uranium enrichment, missile stockpiles, existing enriched material, and regional proxies are all issues the Americans are hoping to negotiate on. The piece also notes Witkoff argues Tehran's collapsing economy could make compromise possible, while warning the alternative would be bad. The report adds that U.S. military assets are still being repositioned and fresh sanctions are expanding pressure, even as Trump keeps the military option on the table. And we'll end with Israel Hayom, which argues that Trump's apparent climb down on Iran is being overstated and that the real showdown may only be delayed. The piece dismisses Gulf claims that diplomacy alone stopped a U.S. strike, suggesting practical factors matter too. For example, U.S. naval assets not yet in place. Also, bad weather over Iran and Trump's preference for tightly planned, high-impact operations. Crucially, it insists Trump's red line still stands. If the regime resumes mass killings, U.S. intervention returns to the table. Yet the piece ends by placing the burden back on Iranian protesters, saying outside help depends on whether they return to the streets, because regime change would still be their fight, not an American ground war. That's it from us today. Thanks for watching the Dailies, only on Al Arabiya English.